Let's get started. Story number 1.
It started as an ordinary road trip, one of those impromptu getaways that my friends and I would often take to break the monotony of our day-to-day lives. There were 4 of us: me, my best friend Lisa, her boyfriend Greg, and my friend Jason, who had just come back from a summer internship. We were all excited, anticipating endless open roads, remote diners, and spontaneous stops along the way. We decided on a trip down Route 66, the historic highway that cuts through small towns, desert stretches, and quiet, forgotten corners of America. Our plan was simple: drive and see where the road took us. We had packed snacks, a cooler, and enough music to last us the entire trip. No particular destination in mind, just the joy of the journey. The first couple of days were filled with good times, driving through quirky towns, exploring old diners, and chatting about everything and nothing. But by the 3rd day, as we neared the end of the stretch of the highway that ran through the Arizona desert, something changed. We had been driving for hours, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The radio had been on the fritz for the past hour, static cutting in and out, and no one had much to say. The road stretched out ahead of us like a ribbon of asphalt, the only sign of life being the occasional car passing by. "Let's take a detour," Jason said suddenly. "There's a town off the highway up ahead. We could stop for a bit." The rest of us were too tired to argue, and Lisa was the first to agree. Why not? A change of scenery might be nice. We had passed a small sign on the side of the highway just a few minutes earlier: "Welcome to Sutterville, 5 miles." It seemed like a good idea, so we turned off the main highway and followed the winding road toward the town. The further we drove, the quieter it became. The air was thick with dust, and the few scattered buildings we passed seemed to be barely standing. The dirt road turned to gravel, and then to an almost completely abandoned stretch of highway. There were no other cars in sight. Even the trees seemed to stand still, as if frozen in time. The kind of stillness you only see in places that have been forgotten. When we finally saw the town's sign, the letters were faded, almost illegible. The words "Sutterville, population 82" were barely visible, and the paint on the sign looked like it had been there for decades. The town was much smaller than we had expected, barely more than a collection of rundown buildings scattered along a narrow street. As we drove in, a strange feeling began to settle in my chest. The town was eerily quiet. Not a single person in sight. Even though it was still late afternoon, there was something off about the place. The buildings were old, but not in the charming, historic way you might expect. They seemed forgotten, abandoned, like they hadn't been touched in years. I glanced over at Lisa, but she didn't seem to notice. Jason and Greg were too busy looking at their phones, probably looking for places to eat or something to do. I stayed silent. The town seemed to be frozen in time, stuck somewhere between the present and some forgotten past. The windows of the houses were boarded up, and the air smelled stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. We drove slowly down the main street, past the old gas station and a handful of houses, each one just as worn and desolate as the last. There was a strange heaviness to the place, an oppressive silence that made my skin crawl. "Okay, this place is a little creepy," Greg finally said, his voice breaking the silence. "Let's grab a quick drink and get out of here." I couldn't agree more, but there was something that made me hesitate. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It wasn't just the silence. It was the way the air felt thick, as if something was waiting just behind the veil of normalcy. But I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I kept it to myself. We finally came to a stop in front of a small, run-down diner that seemed to be the only place open in town. The sign was hanging crookedly, and the windows were dusty, but the flickering neon sign outside said "Open." There was no one around, no cars parked outside. The door creaked as we walked in, and the inside of the diner was dimly lit, with the faint hum of a ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead. A single man stood behind the counter, wearing a faded apron. His hair was wild, unkempt, and his face was lined with age. He looked up when we entered, his eyes glinting in the low light. There was something about his gaze that made me uneasy, but I smiled politely, trying to shake off the feeling. "4 of you, huh?" he said, his voice gravelly. "Y'all passing through?" "Yeah," Jason said, taking a seat at the counter. Just stopping for a drink. The man gave a slow nod. Don't see many travelers out here. This town's been dead for a long time. We all took our seats, and I ordered a soda, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. The man didn't speak much after that. He moved around the diner in a way that was almost mechanical, his motions slow and deliberate, as though he was going through the motions of a routine he had long since grown tired of. It wasn't until the man left to fetch our drinks that we noticed something strange. As I turned my head toward the corner of the diner, I saw a shape in the window, a figure standing outside, just beyond the glass. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was a person, a woman, standing still, staring at us. I froze. Did anyone else see that? I whispered, my voice barely above a murmur. Lisa looked toward the window, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean? There's someone outside, I said, feeling my pulse quicken. A woman. We all turned to look, but by the time we did, the figure was gone. There was nothing outside the window but the empty street. The man returned with our drinks, his expression unchanged. The woman's gone, he said, as if he'd been expecting us to ask about her. What woman? Greg asked, furrowing his brow. The man paused for a moment, wiping his hands on his apron. Oh, you'll find that a lot here. Folks come and go, but Sutterville's been empty for years. Some of the locals, well, they never really left. We all exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. The man didn't seem to want to elaborate, so we stayed silent. After what felt like an eternity, we finished our drinks and the man silently rang us up. We didn't say much as we left the diner, the door creaking closed behind us. As we walked back to the car, I felt that same eerie sensation, the feeling that someone was watching us. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but every time there was no one there. We piled into the car, and I was relieved when we finally started driving again, leaving the town behind. The road was quiet, just the hum of the tires against the pavement. But then, as we neared the edge of town, something strange happened. The headlights of the car flickered for a moment, and then the radio crackled to life. At first, it was just static, but then faintly I heard a voice, a woman's voice. Don't go, the voice whispered. Turn around. I froze, my hands gripping the wheel. Did anyone hear that? They all stared at me, confused. What are you talking about? Jason asked. That voice, I said, my heart racing. It was in the radio, a woman's voice. She said, turn around. Lisa glanced nervously out of the window. This is getting weird, guys, but there was no turning back now. We were already out of Sutterville, speeding down the empty highway. I tried to shake off the unease, but the feeling lingered, heavy in the air. It wasn't until we stopped at the next gas station, a few miles outside of town, that we spoke again about what had happened. The gas station attendant gave us a strange look when we asked about Sutterville. Sutterville, he said, raising an eyebrow. There's nothing there but memories. You're lucky you got out. We didn't stay long. It was the last time we spoke about Sutterville, but the feeling, that eerie presence, stayed with us long after we left. We never went back, and no one ever spoke of it again. Story the end.
Story number 2.
We had been on the road for days, and I was starting to feel it. My legs were stiff from hours in the car, my eyes felt dry from staring at the endless stretch of highway, and the monotony was starting to break me down. But there was something about the freedom of being on a road trip with my best friend Jesse that made it all worth it. We had been planning this trip for years. A journey across the country to see everything, but mostly just to escape from the regular grind of life for a while. Our route had taken us through various states, each with its own charm and quirk, and we had already seen some incredible sights, from the vibrant cities to the quiet stretches of farmland. But today we were heading into the more remote parts of the Midwest, toward the kind of small towns where the signs of life seemed sparse and the roads wound around hills and forests that didn't seem to care much about the rest of the world. We had passed a sign for a town called Deer Creek, which I had never heard of before, but Jesse suggested we take a detour. It could be fun. Let's see something new, he had said with his usual enthusiasm. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon as we entered the outskirts of Deer Creek. It was just about dusk, and the sky had that strange orange hue that made everything look surreal. The roads grew narrower, and soon we were driving through a patch of woods. I could barely make out the details of the trees in the fading light. There was a chill in the air that made me roll the windows up, but the heat in the car was still on, so we both felt warm enough to keep our jackets off. "Looks like a ghost town," Jesse joked, but there was an edge of truth in his words. The streets were eerily empty for a place that should have been bustling with life on a Saturday evening. The few houses that were visible looked abandoned, their windows dark and their lawns overgrown. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the town was hiding something, but I pushed it aside. It was just a small, rural town, after all. We drove further in, and eventually we came to the town square. There was a gas station on the corner, an old diner across the street, and a small motel on the other side. The place was so quiet that it felt almost like we had driven into a time warp. I couldn't even hear the hum of any other cars on the road. The only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. "Should we stop here for the night?" Jesse asked, glancing over at me. "We could use a break, and it doesn't look like there's much further to go." I hesitated. Something about the town felt wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. "I don't know. This place feels weird. What if we just keep going?" But Jesse was already pulling into the parking lot of the motel. "We're here. Let's just ask if they have a room. If we don't like it, we can always leave." Reluctantly, I agreed. The idea of getting out of the car, stretching my legs, and grabbing some food was starting to sound more appealing than just driving further into the unknown. We entered the motel lobby, and the musty smell hit me immediately. The air felt thick, as though it hadn't been ventilated in ages. There was a man behind the counter, tall and thin with a weathered face. His eyes were dark, almost sunken, but he greeted us with a polite smile that felt a little too forced. "Can I help you folks?" he asked, his voice low and raspy, like he hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. "We need a room for the night," Jesse said, smiling back. The man paused for a moment, looking at us both in silence. "We've got a room. It's $40 a night, cash only." "Sure," Jesse said, not thinking twice. He handed over the cash, and the man slid the key across the counter. It was an old brass key with a faded number tag attached to it. The man didn't say anything else, just nodded and motioned toward the door. We grabbed our bags and left the lobby, heading toward the far end of the parking lot where the room was located. The air had grown colder, and there was a strange heaviness to it now, like something was watching us. I could feel my unease growing with every step. The motel room was nothing special. Faded wallpaper, 2 twin beds, a small television that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The window had a view of the parking lot, and I could see the shadows of the trees moving outside in the wind. The room felt off, but I couldn't explain why. "We're really doing this, huh?" Jesse said, dropping his bag onto the bed. "It's kind of funny. You always think small towns will be nice and quaint, but this place feels like it's straight out of a horror movie." I chuckled, but the sound felt hollow in the still room. "Yeah, I'm starting to think you're right." We sat down on the beds and decided to get something to eat at the diner across the street. The place looked like it hadn't changed in decades, with a neon sign that buzzed faintly. The food was simple, burgers and fries, but it was cheap, and we were hungry. As we ate, the waitress, a woman in her early 50s, kept glancing at us in a way that made me uncomfortable. She wasn't overtly rude, but there was a coldness to her that seemed unnatural for a small-town diner. When we paid the bill and left, I caught sight of the man from the motel sitting at a table in the back of the diner, his eyes locked on us. "You noticed that too, right?" I whispered to Jesse as we stepped out into the chilly night air. "Yeah," he replied, looking back toward the diner. "It's like they know something we don't." We hurried back to the motel, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. The town felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As we entered the room, I noticed something I hadn't before. The door to the bathroom was slightly ajar. It wasn't a big thing, but it felt off. I went to close it, but as my hand reached the door, I heard something from the other side. A soft, almost inaudible scratching sound. I froze. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It was slow, deliberate. "Did you hear that?" I asked Jesse, my voice tight. He looked at me, confused. "What?" I pointed to the bathroom. "There's something in there." Jesse rolled his eyes, but he stood up and walked toward the bathroom door. He hesitated, then opened it fully. The room was dark, but nothing seemed out of place. There was no one there. "See?" he said, stepping back. "It's just your imagination. You've been on the road too long." But I wasn't convinced. The scratching sound hadn't stopped. It had just moved to the walls, faint but constant. It was coming from the area near the bathroom, but also the window, the corner of the room. It sounded like something was trapped inside the walls, scraping to get out. "That's not normal, Jesse," I said, my voice shaking. "This place is wrong. We need to leave." He didn't seem to take me seriously, but I could see the unease in his eyes too. We decided to go outside for a while to get some fresh air and think. The parking lot was empty, and the streetlights flickered in the distance. As we stood there, I noticed something strange. The windows of the motel seemed to be alive, moving, as if they were breathing. Suddenly, I had the overwhelming urge to get out of there. Without saying anything more, I grabbed my bag and Jesse followed me. We hurried back to the car and started it up. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the motel behind us, standing like a dark, silent sentinel in the night. We didn't stop again until we were miles away. The road was empty, and I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me, like we had barely escaped something terrible. Neither of us spoke for a long time. It wasn't until we were driving through a nearby town that Jesse finally broke the silence. "You know, I've heard stories. People say that certain places in small towns are cursed, that once you go in, you can never leave." I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew. There was something in that town, something ancient, something waiting for anyone who dared to stay. And for some reason, we had almost been its next victims. Story the end.
Story number 3.
It started like every other road trip we'd taken before. 3 friends, a tank full of gas, and no clear destination. Just the open road and a few playlists. That particular Friday, I had just wrapped up my last college exam, and my roommates Jamie and Chris had been itching for something spontaneous. Jamie had found a string of weird roadside attractions posted on Reddit, and Chris had recently bought a used SUV that he claimed could take on the Rockies. We decided to head out west, following no particular plan, just roads, detours, and whatever weirdness the map threw at us. The trip was mostly uneventful for the first 2 days. Long drives through cornfields, occasional stops at gas stations with flickering lights and bad coffee, and plenty of arguing over music. Jamie insisted on 90s punk, Chris wanted synthwave, and I was just trying to make sure we didn't miss any turns. On the 3rd day, somewhere deep into Colorado, things began to change. We were about halfway through a scenic mountain drive, trying to make it to a bizarre roadside attraction Jamie had read about, a supposedly haunted motel with a giant fiberglass wolf statue out front. We were supposed to reach it by sundown, but thanks to Chris's idea to take a shortcut through a mountain pass, we got lost somewhere between the GPS dead zones. By the time we realized we'd missed the main road, the sun was dipping fast behind the ridges. The first weird thing we noticed was how empty the road became. Not another car in sight. It had been hours since we'd seen a gas station or even a rest stop. No signs, no lights, just trees and more trees. At some point, the road began to narrow. The asphalt cracked in long veins, and we saw occasional damage. Chunks missing like small landslides had taken bites out of it. It looked like the road hadn't been used in years. "There's no way this is the right road," I said from the passenger seat. "Jamie, check the map again." "I'm trying," she said, holding her phone up. "I lost signal 20 minutes ago. I think we're off the main route." Chris slowed the car. "Well, we're not turning back. I say we keep going until we find something. There's got to be a town somewhere." We drove for another 40 minutes without seeing a single sign of civilization. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, we saw headlights behind us, far back, maybe a mile or two, just around a bend. At first, we were relieved. Another vehicle meant we weren't alone. But the longer it stayed behind us without getting closer, the weirder it felt. "Why aren't they passing us?" Jamie asked, turning in her seat to look. "They've been back there for a while." Chris checked the rear view. "I don't like this." We decided to pull off at the next place we could find. Luckily, a small dirt road appeared on the right, leading into what looked like an abandoned rest area. A crumbling sign with faded letters read, Juniper Hollow welcome area. We turned in, planning to let the car behind us pass. The moment we pulled in and turned off the engine, everything got quiet. I don't mean the normal kind of quiet you get in the woods. I mean completely silent. No wind, no birds, not even the faint rustle of leaves. Just dead silence, like someone had hit mute on the whole forest. We waited. The car with the headlights never passed us. Chris turned to look down the road. They should have come by now. I got out of the car to take a look. The road behind us was completely empty. No headlights, no sound of an engine, just blackness swallowing up the asphalt. "I swear I saw a car," Jamie said, stepping out beside me. Chris didn't say anything. He just stared down the road with a tight jaw. The rest area had an old vending machine coated in grime, a cracked map display with sections of the glass missing, and a pair of public bathrooms that looked like they hadn't been used in decades. There was graffiti all over the walls, most of it the usual stuff. But there was one tag scratched into the surface of the map display with something sharp. "Don't sleep here." "What the hell?" Jamie muttered, brushing her fingers over the words. We decided not to stay long. Chris turned the car around, trying to get back to the main road, but the GPS still wasn't working. Jamie tried using her compass app. The phone froze, then shut off. I pulled out mine. Same result. Dead. Batteries full, but the screens just blacked out when we tried using maps or any directional tools. We were about to head back the way we came when Chris noticed something ahead, a lit sign, barely visible through the trees. It looked like a neon vacancy sign, glowing a sickly green. We moved closer. A narrow path led off the cracked road, winding through dense forest. We argued about whether to follow it. Jamie and I wanted to keep driving, but Chris pointed out that we'd been on E for a while. We needed gas, or at least a place to figure things out. Eventually, we gave in. The path opened up to reveal a small, weather-beaten building. A motel, just like the one Jamie had described earlier, though this wasn't the one from Reddit. The sign out front buzzed and flickered. It just read, "Vanish Inn." There were maybe 10 rooms total, all in a single L-shaped structure. The parking lot was empty, except for one vehicle, an old, rusted pickup truck, covered in what looked like moss or mold. The building was dimly lit, with a flickering front office light and a small bell on the door. We hesitated, but the cold was setting in, and our options were limited. Chris went in first. The lobby was dated, probably 1970s decor. There was a counter, a dusty chair, and an old guest book lying open. No clerk, just a sign that read, "Ring for service." Chris tapped the bell. Nothing happened. He rang it again. A moment later, a man appeared from the back room. He was pale, with watery eyes and a smile that felt too practiced. He didn't say a word, just slid a room key across the counter. "Room 7. We asked about gas." He shook his head slowly. "Just sleep." He said, "You'll find what you're looking for in the morning." We should have left, but something kept us there, like we were too tired, too numb, too drawn in by the weirdness to resist. Room 7 was at the far end. When we opened the door, we were hit with a heavy, musty smell, like mildew and something metallic. The lights inside flickered before settling to a dull yellow glow. 2 beds, a dusty TV, and a bathroom with a cracked mirror. The strangest thing was the painting above the bed. It was a landscape of the exact road we'd just come from, right down to the curve in the hill and the broken mile marker. There were shadowy figures standing just off the edge of the road, half hidden in the trees. "Is this?" Jamie started to say, but I cut her off. "Let's just try to sleep. We'll figure it out in the morning." That night, none of us really slept. Chris tossed and turned, mumbling in his sleep. Jamie sat upright in bed, staring at the painting like it was going to move. I lay awake, trying to ignore the constant ticking sound coming from the bathroom. It wasn't a clock. It was more like nails tapping on porcelain. Around 3 a.m., the power went out. The room dropped into pitch black. I fumbled for my flashlight. Jamie's breathing was ragged. "I saw someone," she whispered. I froze. "Where?" "Outside the window, just standing there." Chris groaned and sat up. "I had a dream." No, not a dream. There was someone in the room. We all stood there in the dark, too afraid to move. Eventually, we decided to get out. We packed up and ran to the car, not even bothering to check out. The man at the front desk was gone. The lobby door was open. Inside, the walls were covered with old photographs, guests who had stayed at the motel. Dozens of faces. I froze when I saw one of them. It was a photo of the three of us, standing outside room 7. But we hadn't taken any photos. We got in the car and peeled out of the parking lot. The road back looked different now, newer, clearer, as if we'd somehow crossed over to a different version of it. Within 20 minutes, we hit a main highway. GPS kicked in. Jamie's phone buzzed back to life with a full signal. Chris floored it, and we didn't stop until we hit a diner a couple of towns over. We tried to find the motel online. Nothing came up. No records, no reviews, no photos, not even a listing on old ghost town forums. 2 weeks later, I developed the film from a disposable camera we'd brought along. Most of the pictures came out normal. Gas stations, roadside statues, blurry selfies. But the last photo was different. It showed the three of us in our motel room, asleep in our beds, and standing over each of us were 3 shadowy figures, barely visible against the dim yellow light. None of us had any memory of taking that picture. We haven't talked about it much since. Jamie moved out, Chris sold the SUV, but sometimes, late at night, I still dream about that road. And in those dreams, I always wake up in room 7. Story the end.
Story number 4.
I've never been the kind of person who believes in ghosts or things that go bump in the night. I always prided myself on being the level-headed, rational one in my group of friends. So, when my friend Jess suggested we take a road trip through the Midwest, I was all in. The plan was simple. Get in the car, drive through small towns, grab a few roadside attractions, and just enjoy a few days away from the city life. Little did I know, this trip would change everything I thought I knew about the world. The road trip started out like any other. We had mapped out our route, cramming as many quirky stops as we could into a 5-day adventure. We didn't rush, enjoying the long stretches of highway, stopping at the occasional gas station, grabbing some snacks, and making small talk with locals. We were in Iowa by the 3rd night, making our way through the countryside, looking for somewhere to camp. Jess had this thing for rustic camping, she called it, which meant no hotels, just tents and sleeping bags. I wasn't too excited about it, but I'd learned to go along with her plans. She insisted it'd be an experience, something we'd remember forever. We were driving down a narrow 2-lane highway when Jess pulled over. I hadn't seen any signs for a campground or anything that looked like a place we could stay, but she seemed sure of where we were. "This is it," she said, turning off the engine. "We're going to camp right here." I stared out the window. We were surrounded by tall grass and some dense trees in the distance. There wasn't a house or a single other car in sight. It was eerie, the kind of place you see in horror movies where bad things happen. But I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just the isolation of the area that made me feel uneasy. We unpacked the car, set up our tent, and built a fire. The sun was starting to set, casting a reddish glow over the landscape. It was beautiful, in an unsettling kind of way. As we sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was something strange in the air, something I couldn't put my finger on. Jess noticed me looking around and smiled. "You okay?" "Yeah, I don't know. Something feels off," I admitted. She waved it off. "You're just tired. You've been in the car for hours. The air's just thick out here. You'll get used to it." But I didn't get used to it. Not really. The night settled in, and with it came an eerie silence. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the occasional crackle from the fire. We climbed into the tent, both of us quiet. I tried to sleep, but it wasn't easy. The silence outside was suffocating, and every now and then I would hear what sounded like footsteps, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. But whenever I would open my eyes or listen closely, it would stop. "Jess," I whispered, "do you hear that?" "Hear what?" "Footsteps, like someone's walking around out there." Jess sighed, clearly tired. "It's probably just animals. There are deer and stuff out here. Just go to sleep." But I couldn't. I lay there, wide awake, straining my ears for any sound. After what felt like hours, I heard it again, closer this time. The unmistakable crunch of feet on the forest floor. I pushed the zipper of the tent open just a little and peered outside. The fire had dimmed to just a few glowing embers, casting an eerie red light. The shadows between the trees shifted, but there was no sign of movement. I saw nothing but darkness. I lay back down, still feeling uneasy. Jess was already asleep, her breathing steady. It was then that I realized how quiet the night had become. No crickets, no wind, Nothing but silence. I closed my eyes, hoping to drift off, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I tried to sleep, my mind raced with thoughts. What if someone was out there? What if they were waiting for us to let our guard down? My heart raced at the thought. The next morning, I woke up early, still feeling on edge. Jess was already up, sitting by the dying embers of the fire, sipping coffee. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said, glancing up at me. "I didn't," I admitted. Something was off last night. I swear I heard footsteps around the camp. I even saw something move between the trees. Jess raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" "I know it sounds crazy," I said, shaking my head. "But I swear, Jess, it wasn't just my imagination." She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't press the issue. We packed up the tent and hit the road again, leaving the strange campsite behind us. The road stretched out ahead, the land flat and barren for miles. We reached a small town called Riverbend around lunchtime. It looked like any other quiet, rural town, one of those places that feels stuck in time, the kind where everyone knows everyone else's business. We stopped for gas, and as we were filling up, I noticed a sign for the local diner. I was starving, so we decided to grab a bite. Inside the diner, the smell of frying bacon filled the air. The waitress behind the counter gave us a half-hearted smile and sat us at a booth near the window. I noticed a few locals sitting at the counter, talking in low voices. There was an odd sense of tension in the air, but I couldn't place it. "What's with the vibe in here?" I whispered to Jess as I scanned the room. "I don't know," she said, lowering her voice. "Everyone seems on edge. Look at that guy at the counter." I glanced over. A man in his late 50s was sitting alone, staring out the window. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. There was something about his expression that made me feel uneasy. The waitress brought over our food, and we tried to ignore the strange energy in the room, but it was hard to shake the feeling that something was off. As we ate, I overheard the man at the counter talking to the waitress. "I told him not to camp out there. Nobody ever listens. It's always the same," he said, his voice low and raspy. "They think it's just some back road, but it's cursed. People have gone missing out there, just gone, and they never come back." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Jess looked at me, her eyes wide, and I could see the recognition in her expression. "You talking about the spot out by the old mill?" the waitress asked, her voice tinged with concern. The man nodded. "Yep, same place. Some folks thought it was just some weird coincidence, but there's something out there. You don't mess with it." Jess and I exchanged a look. The feeling in the diner had shifted, and we both suddenly felt very out of place. "I'll be back," Jess muttered, getting up and walking toward the bathroom. I stayed at the table, trying to process what I'd just heard. The old man's words were sinking in, and a chill ran down my spine. When Jess came back, she was pale. "We need to leave," she said, her voice shaking. "That place, it's not right. There's something wrong with it." I didn't argue. We paid for our meal and left the diner quickly, the weight of the man's warning hanging over us. We didn't talk much on the drive, both of us lost in thought. But my mind kept going back to the warning about the mill, and the footsteps, and the feeling that something was watching us. We didn't stop to camp that night. We kept driving, too afraid to pull over anywhere. As the hours ticked by, the sky darkened, and we found ourselves in a more populated area, a small city with lights and signs. We found a motel, paid for a room, and locked the door behind us. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Jess. We both lay awake in the dark, hearing every creak of the building, every faint sound in the distance. I kept thinking about the man's warning. Was it a coincidence, or had we really stumbled onto something we weren't supposed to? The next morning, we left without looking back. The trip had lost its charm, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever we had encountered out there in that quiet corner of Iowa was something far darker than either of us had expected. We never spoke of it again, but every now and then when I drive through the Midwest, I wonder if the shadows are still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting travelers to wander into their path. Story the end.
Story number 5.
We had been driving for hours, the sun having long since set, casting the road ahead in an eerie twilight glow. The interstate was sparsely populated at that time of night, the occasional truck or car whizzing past. The headlights of our old sedan cut through the dark, and the radio, which had been playing softly, finally crackled out, leaving only the hum of the engine and the sound of our tired voices. It was meant to be a quick getaway. Just a few days of driving through the Midwest, stopping in small towns and exploring places we hadn't seen before. There were 4 of us: me, my best friend Laura, her boyfriend Mike, and my girlfriend Emma. It was supposed to be fun, an adventure, just a way to unwind after a hectic couple of months. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We had been driving through rural Kansas for what felt like forever. The landscape was endless, flat farmland stretching out to the horizon, with little to break the monotony except the occasional barn or dilapidated farmhouse. It was the kind of place you could easily drive through without a second thought, just a blur of wide open spaces. "Should we stop for the night soon?" Laura asked, her voice muffled by the steady hum of the car. "I don't know," Mike replied, glancing at his phone. "There's supposed to be a small town up ahead. I think we'll make it there soon." I nodded absently, my eyes flickering over the darkening road. There was a growing sense of unease creeping in, but I couldn't figure out why. It was just a long drive, nothing unusual about it. Yet my fingers tightened around the steering wheel and my gaze kept drifting to the rearview mirror, as though I expected to see something or someone following us. Minutes later, we reached a sign that read, "Welcome to Millfield, population 1,200. It wasn't much, but it seemed like a good place to stop. There was a dim streetlight just ahead, and a few buildings loomed in the distance, casting long shadows against the dark sky. We pulled into a small gas station at the edge of town, the flickering neon sign above it barely lighting up the area. "Let's stretch our legs," Emma suggested, unbuckling her seatbelt and opening the door. The air outside was heavy with the smell of wet earth and stale smoke from the gas station. "Yeah, I need a break," Laura added, following suit. I didn't want to admit it, but something about the town felt strange. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the silence felt too thick, like it was pressing in on us from all sides. The street was eerily quiet, no cars, no people. Even the lights seemed dimmer here, casting a dull yellow glow that didn't quite reach the edges of the buildings. Mike noticed my hesitation and laughed. "You getting spooked, man?" "I don't know. This place just feels off," I said, my voice low. "It's like no one's here." "We're just tired," Emma chimed in, clearly trying to ease the tension. "Let's grab some snacks and get out of here." We wandered into the gas station where an older man stood behind the counter. He barely acknowledged our presence as we made our way down the aisles, picking up chips, drinks, and candy. There was something unsettling about him, though. His face was pale, and his eyes had a hollow, almost vacant look as if he was in a daze. He finally spoke, his voice rasping. "You folks just passing through?" I nodded, trying to smile. "Yeah, just stopping for the night." The man didn't respond right away, instead staring at us as though he was weighing something in his mind. Finally, he spoke again, his voice a low murmur. "You might want to be careful. It's a quiet town, but there's something off about it." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He blinked, and for a moment, his eyes seemed to focus. "Things don't change much in Millfield. People come, people leave, but they don't stay. You'll see." I wasn't sure if he was trying to warn us or just making conversation, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I paid for the snacks, my hand trembling slightly as I handed over the cash. As we walked out, I glanced at the gas station's old sign again, the flickering lights casting strange shadows in the parking lot. "Let's just get to a hotel and sleep," I said, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. We climbed back into the car and I started driving through the main street of Millfield. The town was small, just a handful of buildings, all of them worn down and old. The houses that lined the road were dark, windows obscured by overgrown trees and shrubs. We passed a few houses, but none of them had any lights on. Not a single soul seemed to be awake. Finally, we reached the edge of the town where an old, half-broken sign read Millfield Inn. It was a small, one-story building with a faded, peeling exterior, but it was the only place to stay in town. I parked the car and got out, glancing around warily. The night felt heavier here, the darkness pressing down on us like a thick blanket. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit, with a few old chairs and a rickety counter. An elderly woman stood behind the desk, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She gave us a stiff smile as we approached. "Welcome," she said in a voice that sounded both rehearsed and unnatural. "I'll check you in. Just a single room for the four of you?" I nodded, unsure of what else to say. "Yes, please." She handed me a key without another word and motioned to the stairs leading up to the second floor. "Room 7, she said. "It's a quiet room. It's a quiet room." I felt uneasy, but I didn't want to be rude. We took the key and made our way upstairs, the creaking of the old wooden stairs echoing in the quiet hall. The hotel smelled of dust and old wood, the wallpaper peeling in places, revealing the bare drywall beneath. Room 7 was at the end of the hall, and when I opened the door, I found that the room was just as old and worn as the rest of the building. The furniture was mismatched, the bed linens faded, but it was a place to rest for the night. After we unpacked, we sat down on the bed, and Mike cracked open a beer, while Laura and Emma dug into the snacks we had bought. We were all trying to make the best of it, but I could feel the tension in the air. It was around 2 a.m. when it started. The knocking. At first, it was soft, almost like the sound of someone tapping on the wall. We all looked up at the same time, the sound breaking the silence of the room. The knock came again, louder this time, as if someone was knocking on the door. "Who the hell is that?" Mike muttered, getting up to open the door. When he opened it, there was nothing. No one in the hallway, just the dim glow of the streetlight filtering in through the windows at the end of the hall. "Maybe it's just the building settling," Mike said, though his voice sounded unsure. But the knocking didn't stop. It came again, this time from somewhere deeper within the building. A low, rhythmic knocking, like someone was walking through the hall, tapping on the walls. We all sat in silence, the air thick with fear. Emma's face was pale, and Laura clutched her bag tightly. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the empty street below. It was the same. Nothing. No cars, no people. Then the whispering started. It was faint at first, like someone was speaking just outside our door. We couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear, low, deliberate, almost sinister. My heart was racing now, my pulse pounding in my ears. "What the hell is going on?" Laura whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, the door to the room slammed shut on its own. The lights flickered violently, casting eerie shadows across the room. I looked at each of my friends, their faces a mirror of my own fear. We were trapped, unable to leave, and it felt like the building itself was alive, watching us, waiting for something. We didn't sleep that night. We didn't even speak. The knocking continued, the whispers growing louder until they were almost deafening. In the morning, when we finally mustered the courage to leave, the town was empty, completely silent, as if the events of the night had never happened. The old woman was gone, and the inn was locked up tight. No sign of life anywhere. We left Millfield behind, but I can't forget it. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear the knocking and the whispers. I don't know what happened in that town or who or what was trying to reach us. But I know one thing for sure. We were never meant to stay in Millfield. Story the end.
Story number 6.
It was supposed to be a quick road trip. Just 2 days from Austin to Santa Fe and back. My cousin Nate had scored some cheap antique furniture from a Craigslist seller up in New Mexico. He didn't trust the seller enough to have it shipped, so we decided to make a weekend out of it, just the two of us. We left on a Friday afternoon, threw our bags in the back of my SUV, grabbed snacks, and hit the road with high spirits and low expectations. Neither of us had a clue how bad things were going to get. The drive out of Austin was uneventful, hot, flat, and endless. By the time we crossed into West Texas, the sun had already started bleeding across the horizon. There's a stretch of highway out there past Pecos, but before you get to the New Mexico state line, where the road seems to stretch forever. No exits, no gas stations, just scrubland and sky. That's where we first noticed the headlights. They came up behind us around dusk, 2 pale yellow beams floating low on the road, matching our speed but never getting closer. I pointed it out to Nate. "Probably some local who doesn't want to pass us," he said, munching on trail mix. "It's a 1-lane road, after all." But I was going about 75 miles per hour. It didn't make sense for someone to hang back like that for so long without ever trying to overtake. Every time I checked the mirror, the lights were there. Never too close, never too far, just steady, quiet. persistent. As we neared a rest stop, one of those worn-down, desolate ones with a single bathroom shack and a rusted picnic table, I pulled over to stretch and take a leak. The lights vanished as soon as we slowed down. I checked my mirrors. Nothing. No car turned off behind us, no headlights disappearing into the distance. Nate hopped out and headed to the restroom. I stood next to the car, breathing in the dry desert air, the kind that dries out your lips in minutes. I kept looking down the road, expecting to see the glow of headlights cresting the hill. Nothing. The place was dead silent. No bugs, no wind, just the faint hum of the cooling engine. Then I heard the bathroom door slam hard, too hard, like it had been yanked out of someone's hands. I called out. No answer. I walked toward the structure, gravel crunching under my feet. The door was hanging open, swinging slightly. Nate? I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was pitch black. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating stained tiles and a single urinal. The room was empty. No Nate. My heart jumped into my throat. I ran out and started yelling his name, circling around the rest stop, calling into the scrub brush and cactus. 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. I was sweating through my shirt, panic rising like acid. Then I heard footsteps, fast and uneven, coming from behind the building. Nate stumbled out, looking pale and dazed. Where the hell were you? I barked. He looked at me like I was the crazy one. I was in the bathroom, man. No, you weren't. I looked inside. You were gone. He just blinked at me. No, I went in, peed, and came out. I didn't see you. We argued the whole way back to the car, but he stuck to his story. Said he didn't hear me yelling, didn't even realize I was looking for him. We got back on the road, both of us tense and quiet. That's when the headlights returned. Only this time, they weren't behind us. They were ahead. Faint at first, like two distant lanterns swaying gently in the night. But as we drove, they never seemed to get closer or farther. Just floated there on the horizon, always in view. We passed no other cars. The radio started picking up static and garbled voices, cutting in and out like some broken old CB. At one point, it played a child's laughter, clear as day, then silence. I shut it off. By midnight, we were deep into nowhere. No cell service, no GPS, just the road and the growing feeling that something was riding along with us, or maybe waiting ahead. We saw the motel around 1 a.m. It wasn't on the map. It shouldn't have been there. Desert Palms Motel, the sign read, half lit and flickering. We hadn't seen a town in over an hour. The structure was old, stucco walls faded by sun and time, with one sad-looking palm tree drooping in the parking lot. But we were tired, running on fumes in every sense of the word. Let's crash here, Nate said, just for a few hours. I didn't like the look of the place, but we were running out of options. The office door was open, and an old man sat behind the counter, half asleep. His eyes flicked up when we walked in, but he didn't say a word. Just slid a key across the counter with a room number written on the tag, Room 8. The room smelled like mildew and old cigarettes. One flickering light overhead, a cracked mirror, twin beds with sagging mattresses. We both collapsed onto our beds without bothering to change clothes. I woke up sometime later, maybe an hour, maybe 3, to the sound of whispering. It was low and harsh, like someone murmuring right into my ear. I sat up fast, heart pounding. The room was dark. Nate was still asleep. The whispering stopped the moment I moved. I turned on the bedside lamp. The second I did, Nate shot upright with a scream. He looked wild, like he'd been caught in a nightmare he couldn't escape. His face was soaked in sweat, eyes wide and glassy. "What the hell was that?" he gasped. "What was what?" I asked, trying to stay calm. I was dreaming, but it felt real. There was something in the room, standing over me, whispering. Then it grabbed my leg. I stared at him. "I heard whispering too," I said quietly. We left the light on and stayed awake the rest of the night, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling. Neither of us said it, but we both felt it. Something was wrong with that place. It felt old, not just in the physical sense, but worn out in a way that had nothing to do with time. When dawn broke, we were already packing. We stopped by the office to drop the key off, but it was empty. No old man, no sign of life, just the key rack and an old rotary phone. We left fast. By noon, we crossed into New Mexico and picked up the furniture, a few chairs, a small roll-top desk, and an ornate mirror. Nate was thrilled. Me, not so much. I just wanted to get home. But the feeling followed us. The mirror especially gave me a bad vibe. It was covered in a dusty old sheet, and I told Nate to keep it that way. He laughed at me, but agreed. That night, we stayed at a proper motel in Roswell. Still creepy, but at least there were other people. As I drifted off, I thought I saw a figure standing in the mirror, even with the sheet on it. A shape. Human. Watching. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But the next morning, the sheet was off. Neither of us claimed to have touched it. We wrapped it back up tightly, strapped it down, and didn't talk about it again. The drive home was worse. The headlights returned that night, this time hovering beside us in the desert, not in front or behind. They glided along like something coasting through the air, not tied to any vehicle. Just two glowing orbs pacing us across the darkness. When we finally got back to Austin, I dropped Nate off and didn't go inside. I just wanted to get away from him, from that mirror, from the whole thing. He offered to pay for gas, but I waved him off and left. A week later, I got a call from his sister. Nate was gone. Disappeared from his apartment. The door was locked from the inside. Nothing stolen, no signs of struggle. The mirror was still in his living room, sheetless. I came over. Police had already swept the place. They found no fingerprints on the mirror, not even Nate's, just a smudge near the top that looked like a handprint. His sister said she'd heard him talking to someone late the night before, arguing with a voice she couldn't hear. I didn't say anything. What could I say? I still see the headlights sometimes, on empty stretches of road out of the corner of my eye. They're not always behind me anymore. Sometimes they're ahead. Sometimes they're right beside me. Story the end.
Story number 7.
We'd been planning the trip for over a year. 4 of us. Me, Ryan, Chelsea, and Marcus. College friends bound together by too many late nights, cheap whiskey, and a shared love for the weird and unexplained. After graduation, we scattered across different states, chasing jobs and responsibilities, but we swore we'd take one last road trip before the grind swallowed us whole. So we picked a route that cut through the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Texas, long stretches of desert, forgotten ghost towns, and dusty roads. It sounded perfect. The plan was simple. Start in Phoenix, head toward El Paso, then loop up through Roswell and back west. Chelsea, always the researcher, dug up odd spots along the way. We weren't just looking for scenery. We wanted haunted motels, abandoned gas stations, places with stories clinging to them like cobwebs. It was day 3 when things started to feel off. We were somewhere between Truth or Consequences and Alamogordo. Ryan was driving. Marcus rode shotgun. Chelsea and I were in the back, half dozing in the dry afternoon heat. The radio barely worked out there, so we played music off a Bluetooth speaker until it suddenly went silent. "What the hell?" Chelsea mumbled, pulling the speaker closer. "Battery dead?" I asked. She shook her head. "It was fully charged this morning. Probably just the desert heat messing with it," Marcus said. But we all noticed the way Ryan glanced at the rearview mirror and didn't say anything. A few miles later, we passed a gas station, or what was left of one. The roof had caved in, windows shattered. An old sign swung lazily in the wind, metal screeching like it hadn't had attention in years. The pumps were rusted and overgrown with weeds. I snapped a few photos and joked, "Now that's what I call scenic." Marcus leaned out the window and muttered, "Place looks like it eats people." We laughed, but it didn't feel funny. The next few hours dragged in silence, and even with the AC on, the car felt too hot, like the heat was coming from inside. Chelsea kept glancing out the window, her brows furrowed. "Do you guys feel like we're being followed?" she asked suddenly. Ryan let out a short, humorless laugh. "By what? Tumbleweeds?" "I'm serious," she said. "There's been this black SUV behind us for the last 40 minutes. No plates." We all turned to look. Sure enough, about 5 car lengths behind was a jet black SUV. Tinted windows, no visible license plate. "It's probably just some local," I said. "A rancher or something." Marcus added, "Maybe Border Patrol. They roll unmarked sometimes. But they don't usually stay behind you for miles without making a move." We took a detour to a tiny roadside diner called Mary's Junction, one of those places with more dust than customers. The SUV drove past and didn't stop. We all relaxed a bit. Chelsea even laughed. "See? Just paranoia." The diner's owner, a skeletal old woman with cloudy eyes, shuffled over with menus. Her name tag said June. She didn't smile, didn't even blink much. "You folks heading east?" she asked in a croaky voice. Ryan nodded. Yeah, toward Roswell. June stared at him for a long time. There's not much out there but sand and silence. That's kind of what we're looking for, Marcus said with a grin. She didn't grin back. Be careful past the old range road. The dead don't rest easy out there. Ryan chuckled nervously. Like ghosts? Worse, she said. She didn't say anything else after that, just brought our food and shuffled away. We didn't even finish our burgers. Something about the place sucked the appetite right out of us. As we left, I noticed an old bulletin board near the exit. Faded newspaper clippings, missing persons flyers, hand-drawn maps. One flyer caught my eye, an old photograph of a man in a plaid shirt. Handwritten across the top, last seen on Range Road, May 2006. We hit the road again, mood subdued. No one said it, but we all kept glancing behind us. Range Road wasn't on the GPS. We only knew we were on it because a weather-beaten road sign whispered its name through flaking white letters. The pavement grew rough, the shoulder narrow. Sun was setting, and everything took on that surreal orange glow that makes the world feel just slightly off. Then the SUV reappeared. It was far behind, but we could see it again in the distance. Still no plates. Still no sign of a driver. Okay, that's creepy, Ryan said. I'm going to pull over and let it pass. He pulled off to the side and turned on the hazards. The SUV slowed as it approached, then stopped a few yards behind us. It didn't move. Is it waiting for us? Chelsea whispered. We all stared. The SUV lights flashed, once. Then it turned slowly and drove off the road entirely, disappearing into the desert scrub like it was following a path only it could see. No one spoke for several minutes. Let's just get to the next town, Marcus finally muttered. We kept going. Night fell hard. No moon, no stars. The kind of black that swallows your headlights whole. That's when we noticed the silence. No bugs, no wind, not even the hum of the tires felt normal anymore. Just a low, vibrating quiet that pressed on your chest. Then we saw the figure. Middle of the road, just standing there. Ryan slammed the brakes, the car skidding slightly. A man, or something shaped like a man, dressed in old clothes, faded and torn, his head tilted just slightly to the side. One arm hung longer than the other, like it had been dislocated and never reset. He didn't move as we stopped. Do we go around? I whispered. Marcus said, screw this, and reached for the glove box. He pulled out a flashlight and got out. Marcus, Chelsea hissed, but he was already walking toward it. The figure didn't move. Marcus shined the light on its face and then screamed. He stumbled back to the car, panting, his skin pale. It doesn't have a face. It's just skin, stretched flat. Ryan threw the car in reverse. The figure began to walk toward us, slow, deliberate steps. I looked back through the rear window and saw another one, just like the first, standing behind us now. They're herding us, Chelsea said, like cattle. Ryan hit the gas. We veered off the road, bouncing hard through desert brush. The headlights flickered as we tore through the dirt, finally connecting with another stretch of cracked asphalt. I didn't even know if we were heading in the right direction anymore. We drove until the gaslight came on. A flickering neon sign appeared in the distance. Motel Rest Haven. The building looked abandoned, but we didn't care. Ryan pulled in, engine wheezing, tires crunching on gravel. No one was at the front desk. The lobby smelled like mildew and ash. Keys hung on hooks behind the counter. Room 4 was closest to the office. We took it. Inside, it was filthy. Dust-coated furniture, a broken TV, curtains that might have once been white. But the door locked, and right then that was enough. We all sat in silence for a long time. No one mentioned what we'd seen. It was too insane to process. Around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to pee. The bathroom was at the end of a narrow hallway. As I walked past the window, I froze. The SUV was in the parking lot, lights off, facing our room. I slowly backed away, heart pounding. Then I noticed something else. Movement. At the edge of the lot near the tree line. Figures. Dozens of them. Pale, lanky, tilting heads and stretched limbs. I grabbed Ryan, shaking him awake. They're here. He sat up groggy, then looked outside. Jesus Christ. The others woke to our voices. We tried the door. It wouldn't budge, like it was welded shut. Chelsea screamed. The lights flickered. The walls began to creak like the building itself was breathing. A low hum filled the air, rattling the glass. Then, knocking. Soft at first, then harder. From all sides. Marcus backed into the bathroom, muttering, "No, no, no." The knocking stopped. Everything went still. Then, from the other side of the door, a voice. Low. raspy, not quite human. You never should have come here. Chelsea screamed again, covering her ears. The lights blew out. Total darkness. I felt something crawl across my foot, then up my leg. I kicked wildly and heard it thud against the wall. But when Ryan turned on his phone flashlight, nothing was there, except handprints on the ceiling. Hundreds of them. By morning, the door opened without a problem. The SUV was gone. So were the figures. We ran to the car. It started, somehow. No one spoke for hours. We drove until we reached a busy town, checked into a clean hotel, and locked every bolt we could. We never found Rest Haven on any map. The road leading to it didn't exist anymore. We tried to go back a month later, just to make sense of it. The area where the motel should have been, nothing but desert. But I know what we saw. We all do. None of us have done another road trip since. Story the end.
Story number 8.
It was supposed to be just another road trip. 4 friends in their late 20s, Jake, Leo, Tanya, and Morgan, were heading out from Phoenix to Durango for a weekend hike and a break from the city. They'd taken road trips before, but something about this one felt different right from the start. The sky was unusually gray for an Arizona morning, and Morgan had commented in passing how the desert smelled wrong. They'd all laughed it off, joking she was just hungover from the bar the night before, but none of them could shake a weird tension in the air as they packed up Jake's old Suburban and hit the road. Jake was the driver, always had been. He liked control, and besides, the Suburban was his. Tanya sat in the passenger seat with her feet up, scrolling through a playlist. Leo and Morgan took the back seat, surrounded by coolers, backpacks, and sleeping bags. They left the city just before 10 a.m., figuring they'd get to Durango by nightfall with a few scenic stops along the way. But somewhere near the Arizona-New Mexico border, things started to get strange. It began with the detour. They were driving on U.S. Route 191 when they hit a construction sign. The sign looked makeshift, like someone had thrown it together last minute with orange cones and a weather-beaten board that read, "Detour, road closed ahead." The GPS didn't mention any closures, and no other cars were around. Still, Jake didn't want to risk hitting a dead end and losing time. He took the detour onto a narrow 2-lane road that veered eastward, promising to reconnect with the highway in about 25 miles. The new road was tight, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles, and flanked on both sides by thick stretches of dry mesquite and juniper. After 10 minutes of silence, Leo said, "This road's not even on Google Maps." Jake shrugged it off, but Tanya twisted in her seat, frowning. "It's probably just old," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. An hour passed, then 2. The road didn't reconnect. It didn't curve back west toward the highway either. Instead, it went deeper into what looked like nowhere. The sky darkened prematurely, and the clouds thickened until it felt like late evening. They hadn't seen another car since turning onto the detour. No houses, no signs, not even a single power line. "Are you sure we didn't miss a turn?" Morgan asked, leaning between the front seats. Jake glanced at the nearly dead GPS. "It hasn't updated in a while," he said. "No signal." "We should have been back on the main road by now," Leo said, checking his phone. "I've got nothing. No bars, not even emergency calls." Something about the road didn't make sense. The pavement was smooth, almost too smooth, like it had been freshly laid. Yet there were no road markings, no lines, no mile indicators, nothing. The trees along the side had grown dense and wild. Jake swore he saw something crouching in the brush once or twice, but it vanished before he could point it out. "Let's just turn back," Tanya said finally. "This is creepy." Jake nodded, more out of anxiety than agreement. He found a place wide enough to do a 3-point turn and reversed the Suburban carefully. But when they turned around, the road behind them was gone. Where there had been pavement minutes before, there was now just dirt and scattered rocks. A few feet into the dirt, it disappeared into thick vegetation. The blacktop they had driven on was gone, like it had never existed. Jake killed the engine. No one spoke. Tanya rolled down her window slightly. The silence outside was absolute. No wind, no rustling leaves, not even birds. Then, far off, there came a sound, faint, a rhythmic thudding like heavy boots hitting the earth. But it was too steady, too mechanical. Morgan whispered, "Do you guys hear that?" They all did. The noise grew louder, closer. It was coming from the woods to their right. Tanya quickly rolled up the window again, locking the doors without even thinking. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Jake restarted the car and pressed the gas. The wheels spun for a second before gaining traction. He drove forward, not the way they'd come, but along the strange, directionless road, the only path available. They drove in silence for another hour. No one spoke. The further they went, the more twisted the trees became, their limbs bending toward the road like reaching fingers. Morgan kept her eyes closed, muttering under her breath. Leo kept checking his phone even though he knew it was useless. Finally, they spotted a building. It was a small gas station, an old, rusted-out shell of one, really, with a single pump, the price board bleached white and blank. The convenience store behind it looked condemned, windows boarded up, door askew, the roof partially caved in. "Should we check it out?" Jake asked. No one wanted to say yes, but they were nearly out of gas. It wasn't a choice. Jake and Leo stepped out first. The air was stale, unnaturally dry. Tanya and Morgan stayed in the car with the doors locked. The two men approached the store. The pump was dead. No power. Jake rattled the convenience store door. It creaked open without resistance. Inside, dust coated everything. Shelves were mostly empty, save for a few sun-bleached cans of food and ancient-looking candy bars. The cash register was missing. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly, though there was no breeze. Leo nudged a can with his boot. No one's been here in decades. They turned to leave and saw a man standing at the far end of the store. He was just there. No sound, no warning. He wore a gas station uniform, faded blue with a name patch that was too dirty to read. His face was pallid, stretched thin across high cheekbones, eyes dark, almost black, and he was smiling. Neither Jake nor Leo had seen him come in, and yet there he stood. "Need help with gas?" the man asked. His voice sounded normal. Too normal, like a recording. Leo and Jake both took a step back. "We're fine," Jake said. "Just passing through." The man kept smiling. "People don't pass through here, not anymore." Jake reached for the door. "Thanks anyway." "You'll be needing gas," the man said. Outside, Tanya screamed. Jake and Leo ran back to the car. The man didn't follow. They got inside and locked the doors. Tanya was crying, pointing through the windshield. Morgan was pale, shaking. "There were people in the trees," Tanya said. "Dozens of them, watching us." Jake started the engine. It took a few tries, but it roared to life. He floored it, kicking up dust, speeding away from the station. No one looked back. The road twisted tighter now, the trees nearly closing overhead. Darkness fell unnaturally fast. There was no sunset, just a sudden blackness like someone flipped a switch. "We're not on Earth anymore," Morgan whispered. "I swear to God, we're not." Then the headlights flickered, just for a second. Then again, and again. The engine began to sputter. Jake kept his foot on the gas, but the Suburban slowed down. Finally, it stopped completely. The headlights died. Dashboard blank, dead silence. Then came the knocking. It started on the rear window. Soft at first, then again, louder. Then another knock on the driver's side, then the passenger side. The car was surrounded. No one could see anything outside, but the sound kept coming. Dozens of knocks, all around them. Leo yelled, "Don't open your eyes. Don't look at them." Tanya screamed. The windshield began to fog up from inside, even though it wasn't cold. Then handprints began to appear. Not just one or two, but many. Small ones. Children's hands. Dozens of them. Pressed against the glass, leaving long, smeared trails as they moved. Morgan started to sob, whispering something over and over. "They want us to remember them. They want us to remember." The knocking stopped. Silence again. Then a single voice, clear, young, female, whispered right outside the passenger window. "Help us." Tanya lost it. She tried to open the door, but Jake grabbed her wrist, yelling. Leo reached over to lock it again. The voice outside repeated it, louder, angrier this time. "Help us." Then came the screaming. Not from Tanya, not from Morgan, from outside the car. Hundreds of voices, screaming, shrieking, crying. It sounded like a massacre. Pain, fear, rage, all at once. The car was shaking now. Jake turned the key. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Then, out of nowhere, light. A blinding floodlight illuminated the road in front of them. The Suburban's engine roared back to life. Jake hit the gas. They drove through a wall of mist and emerged, suddenly, onto a highway. Just like that, the sun was up. The trees were normal again. There were other cars. Jake pulled over immediately. They all got out, vomiting, crying, gasping for air. A man in a pickup truck stopped and asked if they were okay. They didn't know what to say. When they finally looked at the GPS, it showed they were on Route 5 and 50, nearly at Durango. No sign of the detour road, no gas station, nothing. The Suburbans still had the handprints. No one could explain it. They tried. Theories ranged from gas leaks to mass hysteria to hallucinations, but no one ever really believed it was anything explainable. A week later, Leo called Jake in the middle of the night. He'd been researching ghost towns along the route and found an article about a small village that had burned down in the 1960s. Accidental gas explosion. Dozens dead, many of them children. The town had a single gas station. Jake didn't want to hear more. They never spoke of it again. But sometimes, even years later, when it's very quiet at night, Jake swears he can still hear the knocking. Story the end.
Story number 9.
It was in late October when 3 of us, me, Daryl, and Marcus, decided to take a road trip across the Southwest. We were all in our mid-30s, burned out from work, relationships, and the repetition of daily life. The plan was simple. Drive from Phoenix to Roswell, stop at some weird tourist spots, maybe camp out a night or two, and then loop back through New Mexico and Arizona. We left on a Thursday morning. I drove my old Jeep Cherokee, packed with snacks, a cooler full of beer, and a couple of sleeping bags. We took the long way, winding through dusty 2-lane highways and forgotten towns, the kind of places that barely show up on GPS. That was part of the fun, or so we thought. The first 2 days went great. We stopped at the Meteor Crater, ate at an alien-themed diner outside of Winslow, and even camped out near the Petrified Forest. On the third night, we were somewhere between Carrizozo and Corona, New Mexico. It was after sunset, and we were behind schedule. We didn't have a place to stay and figured we'd just pull over and sleep in the car or pitch the tent somewhere secluded. Marcus was the first to spot it, a faded sign just off the road that read, "Sundown Motel, Vacancy." It was almost hidden behind a row of dead trees and barely lit by a flickering neon tube. The place looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 1970s, maybe longer. There was only one car parked out front, and even that looked abandoned. But we were tired, and none of us felt like setting up camp in the cold desert night. The old man at the front desk was wearing a moth-eaten sweater, his face like parchment, with watery eyes that didn't blink much. He barely looked at us when we asked for a room, just handed over a metal key attached to a thick wooden fob with the number 6 burned into it. "I don't recommend wandering around after dark," he mumbled as he handed over the key. "Things ain't quite right round here after sundown." Daryl chuckled under his breath. Creepy old man cliché? Check. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Stale-smelling carpet, 2 double beds with floral-patterned comforters, a humming wall heater, and a black rotary phone mounted on the nightstand. The lampshades were yellowed with age, and there was a deep crack running through the mirror over the dresser. But it was warm, and we were tired. We cracked open a few beers and sat on the beds, watching the static-filled local news on an old CRT television. By midnight, we were passed out, each in our own beds, except Marcus, who took the sleeping bag on the floor. I woke up sometime later, not sure what had stirred me. The room was pitch dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the parking lot through the thin curtains. I thought maybe I heard something, a whisper, a knock. I turned over, trying to ignore it, when I saw the shadow. It was standing in the corner near the cracked mirror. Tall, motionless. At first, I thought it was Marcus, but I could still hear his breathing from the floor. I blinked a few times, trying to adjust, and as I sat up slowly, the shadow melted into the wall. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, I asked the guys if they had heard or seen anything weird. Daryl said no, and Marcus laughed it off, blaming the beer and my overactive imagination. But that day, things started to feel off. We tried to leave the motel early, but when we turned the key in the ignition, the Jeep didn't start. Not even a click. I popped the hood, expecting a loose cable or dead battery, but everything looked fine. The old man from the front desk appeared behind us like a ghost. "Car won't start, huh?" he rasped. "Nope," I said, annoyed. "Battery, maybe." "Could be," he said, staring at the car like he'd seen this before. "She don't like when folks leave too soon." "Who's she?" Marcus asked, half laughing. The old man didn't answer, just turned around and shuffled back to his office. It took most of the day, but eventually a tow truck came from the nearest town. about 30 miles away. The mechanic checked the Jeep and told us the battery was completely drained, even though it was only a few months old. We replaced it, and the car started like nothing had ever happened. That night, we debated whether to try another motel, but the nearest options were over an hour away. We were tired and rationalized that the old place was weird, but harmless. We got the same room, number 6. That second night, things escalated. Around 2 a.m., Daryl woke up yelling. His face was pale, drenched in sweat. He said he'd seen someone standing over Marcus, just watching him. A woman, he claimed, wearing a tattered white dress, her hair covering her face. Marcus got mad, thought Daryl was messing with him, but then I told them about the shadow I saw the night before. The room suddenly felt colder, heavier, like the air had thickened. We decided to leave. It was stupid, we figured. 3 grown men scared of a creepy old motel. But when we stepped outside, the fog had rolled in thick, even though we were in the desert. We couldn't see 10 feet in front of us. The parking lot lights flickered and then went out. We turned back to the room, but something had changed. The door was ajar, even though I knew I had shut it tight. Inside, everything was rearranged. Beds against the wrong walls, dresser upside down, phone off the hook. The mirror was shattered completely now, spiderweb cracks spreading across the wall. We didn't sleep. At dawn, the fog lifted. We packed and drove away without looking back, not even bothering to check out at the front desk. But even after we left, it wasn't over. We kept driving, heading toward Roswell, but strange things started happening. The same song kept playing on the radio, no matter the station. Some old country ballad none of us recognized, sung by a woman with a voice like broken glass. Every signpost we passed said, "Sundown, 2 miles," even though we were nowhere near it anymore. Then we started seeing her. Sometimes in the rearview mirror, standing by the roadside. Other times reflected in windows, watching us from abandoned buildings. Once, Marcus swore he saw her face pressed up against the car window while we were doing 60 down the highway. Daryl lost it on the 5th day. He stopped talking entirely, just stared ahead like he was in a trance. That night, we found him sitting by the campfire, whispering to someone who wasn't there. We packed up and drove straight home the next morning. After we got back to Phoenix, things didn't go back to normal. Daryl checked himself into a clinic after he started waking up with scratches on his arms and bruises he couldn't explain. Marcus moved in with his sister and refused to be alone at night. I started hearing knocking at my apartment door around 3:13 a.m. every night. Always 3 knocks, soft and slow. I tried to research the motel, but it didn't exist on any maps. No listings, no reviews, no records. When I called the nearest town's Chamber of Commerce, they told me the Sundown Motel had burned down in 1981. All 10 guests and the owner were never found. They said it was arson, set by a woman who believed her husband was cheating on her. She locked the doors from the outside and lit the place on fire. Supposedly, she died in the blaze, too. Some say she still walks the highway looking for new guests. I still have the room key. I don't know why I kept it. Sometimes at night, I hear the rotary phone ring, even though I don't own one. And in the silence between the rings, I hear breathing. Heavy, raspy, like someone waiting for me to pick up. Story the end.